everyone. Today we are exploring the fascinating topic of the body that speaks. We'll be examining the relationship between our bodies and our experiences of health and illness. Don't worry, it won't be a dry lecture. We're going to explore how sociologists argue that we both are and have a body, how our bodies communicate, and why understanding this can help us navigate our health in a richer and informed way. Imagine this. You wake up with a nagging headache. Is it just because you didn't drink enough water yesterday, or could it be something more serious? Our bodies are constantly speaking to us through signs and symptoms, and deciphering these signals can be quite a puzzle. This is a scenario we've all found ourselves in at some point. And as I said at the beginning, sociologists have long argued that we both are and have a body. In other words, we are embodied beings, and the body is at the center of our health and illness experiences. From a biomedical standpoint, which is the one that is really dominant in Western society, the body is a relatively straightforward entity. It's a biological machine that might break down, get headaches, and then need to be fixed and need repair, just like fixing a car. And we can hear this way of thinking in common phrases in conversation like body maintenance or body repair. But as social scientists, we understand that it's more complex than that. The body is not just a mere machine. So while we often view the body as a machine in just our kind of day-to-day thinking, it is also actually much more. It's a sociocultural artifact, which means it's shaped and influenced, and the way that we think about it is influenced by psychological, social, and cultural factors. And this complexity is what makes this topic of exploring the meanings of the body so fascinating. Now, it might sound a bit heavy at the moment, but stay with me. There is really some fascinating stuff in here. Let's consider two important points integral to understanding health, or rather to our understanding of health. Firstly, how the human body is understood. Our views about the body are intertwined with and embedded within the social world in which we live. The body functions as a symbol. It provides markers of social status, family position, age, gender, tribal affiliation, and much more. So the body communicates to other people, and it also communicates about our personal conditions. How we look and present ourselves can show whether we are well or ill. Think about it. Why do we see tanned skin as a sign of health? What does tan skin represent? And we know that today it might be a sign of health, whereas a century ago it might have been seen as a mark of the working class. And as we've come to find out more about cancer, we might even see it as unhealthy. So our perceptions change with time and context. As I've touched on before, another example is the size of bodies. In Western society, slimness is considered attractive, but in other places and at other times, larger body sizes have been seen as attractive. So in different times and cultures, bodily appearances have held different meanings. In Westernized cultures today, we know about the trend of healthism, which is an ideology where being healthy is equated with being a responsible citizen. So slim, fit, and youthful bodies are celebrated, while those that don't meet these criteria can often be judged very harshly. And this shows the moral aspect of health that is deeply rooted in Western values. So how our bodies appear to others is important in the context of health and illness. So this is true in general, but particularly in Western society where the external appearance is far more important to us than the function. So being healthy because we want to look beautiful is more important than being healthy because of what a healthy body can do necessarily. So primarily, health and beauty are very tightly interwoven. The other important thing to mention, which we dealt with in the last section of the course, is how medical ideas are such an important framework in westernized contexts like Aotearoa, New Zealand. In addition, obviously, to the social, cultural, and economic and political issues that are going on in a particular context. So these different frameworks and meanings interact with one another. So medical ideas rub up and come into play with the stuff that's happening in the context around us. And we can see this when we look at studies of medical knowledge, and these show how this knowledge is shaped by culture. So one example is in Kate Hudson's article, where she looks at how endometriosis is really poorly researched and not very well known about, and she calls this a willful ignorance. And the point really is that the worldview at the time that that knowledge is generated shapes the knowledge. So this includes our biases and preoccupations. Another good example, a bit more humorous in some ways, is Emily Martin's article about the romance between the egg and the sperm. And she looks at how the process of fertilization is represented over time in medical textbooks and how ideas about gender shape those representations. So while medicine often presents the body as objective and scientific, and the knowledge that it produces in that way, theorists and researchers argue that medical knowledge is far from neutral and value-free. Instead, medical knowledge often supports the interests of powerful groups in explicit or implicit ways. So medical knowledge can reflect and reinforce existing social inequalities. We've seen that in the example of hysteria that we discussed earlier in the course. And historically, the straight white male body has been used as the template for health and for research on medical research. And this means that other bodies have been marginalized and often positioned as deviant or as needing to be controlled. So women, people of color, disabled people, gender non-conforming people, and so on. And this has led to harmful practices like forced sterilizations or conversion therapy. And if you think that this is ancient history, think again. Even today, medical research often overlooks conditions that primarily affect women, like endometriosis, or minority groups. And I mean, the endometriosis example is a clear example of that. So certain issues can be underrepresented or ignored in the medical realm because of these biases and preoccupations of the time. Let's move on to the second point, how people experience their bodies or embodiment. So to start off with an example, if we think of two people with identical injuries, back injuries, they might be experiencing the same exact injury, but they would experience their pain very differently and respond to it very differently, perhaps. So one person might see the pain as a sign that they need to slow down and rest, while the other person might push through thinking that it would be weak or lazy to stop and rest. And these reactions and the responses are based obviously in people's personal contexts, maybe how they grew up or the kind of work that they do. But it's also strongly linked to what their culture might believe about pain and what it means to take a break or to rest. So we can see that health and illness are primarily embodied experiences, and they are embedded in the social context that people exist in. This means that even natural bodily conditions or events like birth, giving birth, aging, being ill aren't only physical, but because they're understood differently across cultures, and that there are these bigger sociocultural meanings that inform how they're understood, the way we actually experience the sick body, the aging body, giving birth, all of those natural events are experienced in fundamentally different ways. So we know, for example, we've discussed a little bit before about how women's bodies are viewed as problematic and erratic and out of control, and essentially inferior, and that this influences how women perceive the bodily signs that they are receiving and the changes that they see in their bodies, especially hormonal changes like menopause or those that lead up to the menstrual period. So these experiences can differ between cultural groups because the group holds different meanings. And for us in westernized cultures, we know that, as I said, the medical framework is our primary mode of understanding the body. It's a primary framework of meaning that we draw on. And obviously, this is influenced by biomedical discourse. So if we look at how bodies are understood in medicine, we know that the biomedical framework is used to make meaning, obviously, of our personal experiences, but also the way that we generally study the body and theorize about it, including as critical health psychologists, because obviously Western culture has given rise to critical health psychology. So essentially, the modern body is viewed primarily through the lens of biomedical discourse. And we know that the biomedical perspective focuses on universal bodily processes and that it separates the person from their body. So bodies are seen as passive objects that can be monitored, used, transformed, and crucially, improved. So if we stop for a moment to think about how this biomedical perspective might impact how medical professionals, medicine, and even society at large sees people with bodies that deviate from the norm, we might recognize some of the challenges that people from these groups might have, and we'll discuss those a little bit in the seminars. So what does this all really matter? And we've said in this course before that the way that we make meaning about things have material consequences. So ideas about health and the body shape the way that individuals and society responds and acts. So put another way, how a problem is defined informs any treatment or policy response. Like the old saying goes, if you only have a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. So if we want to address health issues in a more holistic way, we can ask questions like, how do people understand their bodies and how does this shape their responses? How do individuals treat one another based on these understandings? So that's about how people make sense of their own bodily experiences. But we can also look at the body as communicating with others. So we might ask, how do individuals negotiate with others when moving between states of health and illness? So the point here is that because the body is a medium of communication for being ill or not, the way you present or perform your illness needs to be recognized by others in society. So if you want to be seen as a sick person and receive medical treatment or welfare or time off work or any other kind of support, people need to find your presentation of illness and of your bodily signs convincing. So where does this lead us? Our bodies, as I've said, are physical entities, but they're also sites for meaning making. And they're constantly communicating with us through various signs and symptoms. When we feel pain or discomfort, our bodies are speaking to us or signaling potential issues that need our attention. For example, a persistent headache, like we spoke about at the beginning, could be dehydration, or it could be an indication of a more serious condition like a migraine or hypertension. Interpreting these signs involves understanding what our bodies are trying to tell us, a process that's deeply personal but also influenced by social and cultural contexts. So if we take another example, fever, for instance, while an elevated temperature is a sign of infection, how we interpret and respond to that symptom can vary widely. And the decisions that we make will depend on our personal health beliefs, cultural influences, past experiences, and access to healthcare resources. The other important thing is that when we try to figure out what's wrong with us, we often turn to other people. So our family members, our whānau, friends, or medical professionals. And how we represent our symptoms to these people will play a crucial role in the process of meaning making and interpretation. But at the same time, also, our bodies communicate with those others and are read by them. So the visibility of our symptoms or lack thereof can significantly affect how others perceive our illness. So someone with a visible rash might immediately receive empathy and help and support, but someone with invisible chronic pain might struggle to have their condition recognized and validated in the same kind of way, even though it is arguably more serious. So this whole process of symptom interpretation is shaped by social perceptions of health and illness. And the bodily appearance is crucial and often just glossed over. So a person who looks healthy but feels unwell could be treated with skepticism or even discrimination, especially if their condition is stigmatized, as in the case of chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. People that have this condition often experience disbelief and a lack of understanding because their symptoms aren't easily visible. And this can lead to social isolation and difficulty accessing appropriate care. And we'll look a bit deeper at that when we look at issues like medically unrecognized or contested illnesses. In essence, our body's ability to speak through signs and symptoms is a complex interplay of biological signals and social interpretations. Making sense of these bodily experiences requires not only personal insight, which is usually what traditional health psychology is focused on, but it also has a social element. We need the support and validation of our social networks and medical professionals. So our body's messages are both deeply personal and socially mediated. And this is what we go on to look at now that we've established the importance of the body in this process. So stay tuned, stay curious, and stay critical.